You know that it's going to be very compelling and exciting.
We wanted to capture what people's memory was of this with both the music and the imagery. And I think when you could capture the spirit but show them something new and
Oh boy, I'm really covering this, huh? I feel like I'm digging my own grave here. Someone please just make sure that I'm buried with a spoon, a picture of me and my cats, and about 30 pictures of Pearl being a moron. I don't really have a good segue for this subject, so I'm just going to say it. The Lion King live-action remake? It doesn't work, but probably not for the reason you may think. Why is that? Okay, so I just want to start off this video by saying I think The Lion King 2019 is visually impressive. It's pretty wild that they could recreate the animals and Kenyan environments with photorealistic accuracy. Computer-generated imagery, or CGI, has come such an incredibly far way since Pixar's very own Toy Story, which was released in 1995. We've even gotten to the point where some people legitimately think that real animals were used in the making of this movie. Newsflash, they weren't. Everything is computer animated, regardless of the live-action label that it's been given. But with the evolution and advancements of this technology has also come a shift in the attitude towards animation in general. What I mean by this is the style in which it is considered to be the most professional and the most desirable. I'm sure you've all noticed the trend of photorealism in animation, or live action as the term has been coined in recent years. Even in more cartoony animated films like Toy Story 4 and Frozen 2, there's still a level of realism mixed with the stylized cartoon features. For Toy Story 4, the realism comes in things like the textures or with the cat that patrols the antique shop. In Frozen 2, it comes in the way that the ocean looks. Even in cartoons that aren't meant to look real, these photorealistic elements are still mixed in. That's not to say that this style of animation is bad. In fact, it adds a lot to Disney's movies and shows off just how real they can make things look. However, there is a point where all of these advanced visuals start to work against the overall quality and the message that their project is trying to convey. Case in point, The Lion King 2019, otherwise known as the live-action Lion King. Now, I was debating talking about this since the movie was announced, but I continued to hold off until my suspicions were proven to be valid. After seeing the Jimmy Kimmel sneak peek of Hakuna Matata, my suspicions were confirmed, so here we are. That scene showed me just what I was looking for, that photorealistic animals cannot emote in a way that is obvious to and resonates with humans. Now, this may seem like something obvious to say, but there's a few layers as to why this is important. First, let's get this out of the way. Animals are incredibly expressive. However, most of their expressions are not in the facial features as it is with humans. It's mostly in their body movements, especially with felines. And if being a cat owner of 17 years has taught me anything, it's that people really do not understand feline body language. Slow blinking is a sign of love and comfort, belly showing may not be your cat asking for a belly rub, but as a way of them saying I trust you, and a wagging tail most of the time does not mean that they're happy to see you. It can, but it mostly means that they're agitated. Cats are incredibly expressive animals. It just isn't obvious to most people. This is why you get shows like My Cat from Hell where people claim to have a demon cat, but it was really just a case of them improperly reading their cat's body language. It's also why you get people saying that cats are aloof and uncaring when that really couldn't be further from the truth. Now, I bring this all up with good reason. If people can't even understand an animal's body language in real life, how are they expected to understand it on the big screen with photorealistic animals? After all, we've seen that there is no stylization in their faces, so we can't read their emotions through their facial expressions. Instead, the audience is supposed to interpret how the character is feeling through their vocals and body movements, as well as using their knowledge of the original film. And while the voice cast is indeed talented, and I think they are doing a good job from what we've seen so far, all of the emotional expression shouldn't be resting on their shoulders. Part of what made the original Lion King so great was the emotion and the expression dripping from each scene, whether it was in the form of color use, cinematography, or character movement and the expressions. You can't really have any of these things in a non-stylized photorealistic environment. Kenya isn't as colorful as it is in the 2D movie. That's just a fact. If it were, the real animals themselves would be just as colorful so that they could blend into their environments and hide from predators. Instead, it is like it is in the movie. The backgrounds are dull greens and browns, and so are the animals who live there. Evolution makes it so that they blend in to increase their survival, so it's only natural that they also blend in and are dull in the movie as well. This is why these movies as a whole end up being so dull and lifeless, because they're taking everything from real life and nothing from the imagination. Not even their subject material is imaginative, since they're just frame by frame making a movie with some minor changes. If I wanted to see dull colors and realistic animals, I would turn on Animal Planet. This photorealistic style just doesn't really have a place in a musical setting where emotion is the biggest selling point. If the main characters weren't lions and were humans, then yes. It would theoretically work to make a live-action version. It's just like how many people thought the Aladdin live-action was great, but the difference in that remake was that the main characters were humans. Sure, there were some main animal characters like Abu, but he isn't the main character who you're meant to feel emotion from. There are no humans in The Lion King. A better example of a movie with more animal characters would be The Jungle Book and Narnia. The difference between these movies and The Lion King, however, is that they were stylized. In an interview with Jon Favreau, who is the director of The Lion King 2019, he admitted that he didn't like how The Jungle Book came out because the animals weren't realistic enough. In his own words, the animals began to look more like humans the more expression you gave them. And while yes, this is true, I don't really think that it's a bad thing. After all, you are making this for a human audience. I'm not really sure why photorealism is seen as this holy grail of entertainment. It's impressive to replicate, but you stand to lose so much when you go all in. You get to the point where something that you should be using as an inspiration is instead used solely as reference. All of the creativity is gone and you're left with an unimpactful final product that doesn't feel special or unique. People aren't going to remember the movie with the realistic talking lions down the road 10 years from now. However, they will remember the colorful, vibrant, and expression-filled original. It's why even today those films are still being talked about in a positive light, and why kids even today still love those movies. You never hear anyone talking about the live-action remakes a few years after they've been out, and I think that Disney is very self-aware of this issue. I say this because if you watch certain scenes from the live-action movie, Simba in particular has exaggerated body movements to make up for his lack of facial expressions. They know that they can't properly get the animation across to their audience with voices alone, so they attempted to compensate for what they didn't have by exaggerating on what they did have. The result is overly bouncy animals with stylized movements but photorealistic textures and faces. This makes them fall into the uncanny valley rather than look like lively, realistic animals. While the uncanny valley is generally referred to when talking about human and robots, it can also be used for anything that is computer-generated or robotic. The uncanny valley essentially means that something looks real enough to fool you into thinking that it is real, but something is wrong and eerie about it. In this case, the animals give an uncanny valley feeling because they closely resemble their non-animated counterparts, but something about it is wrong or missing. Specifically, in this case, it's the way that the animals move. We know they look like real animals, but they don't move like real animals. This sets off that eerie feeling because our brains are being fooled, but not entirely. We can tell that something, somewhere, is off. So, in refusing to take a fully stylized approach and only taking artistic freedom in the body movement and language of the animals, they've reached uncanny valley instead of full-on photorealism, which was their goal. While these movements do aid in the expression of emotions, it leaves me wondering why. Why would using stylized realism be so bad, and why are they desperately trying to avoid it? Why do we need to have photorealism for this movie and all the other Renaissance films in the first place? Why only stick to what nature can express when animation gives us the freedom to put our twist on our surroundings? Just why? There really doesn't seem to be an answer here other than Disney wanting to flex and show people what they can do, which in of itself isn't a bad thing. Disney should show off what they're capable of. I just don't think that this was the right movie for that. A movie with no human cast isn't the right place for that. Ironically enough, on a technical level, The Jungle Book would have been the better setting for this style since the main character, Mowgli, is a human child. At least then you would have the expressions from the human character bearing the emotional weight of the movie. The Lion King doesn't have that. And even if The Jungle Book has a human character, that doesn't automatically mean that the animal character should be full-on photorealistic either. You're still supposed to empathize with these characters and you're supposed to somewhat relate to them. It makes it infinitely harder to do that when you have a realistic big cat staring emotionlessly forward. So what if giving them the expressions that they don't naturally have make them look more human? You're showing this to a human audience. You aren't showing it to an audience of actual lions who can appreciate your accuracy. It's impressive visually, but you lose the purpose of the original movie along the way. If you took the facial expressions and exaggerated them, then yes, you would lose the full realism you were aiming for. But you would also gain back the emotion given through facial expressions while also taking away the uncanny valley vibes. This has been done before in Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with Aslan. Aslan had so much expression and wisdom just in his eyes that it was easy to tell what he was feeling. In his sacrificial scene, for example, his eyebrows were creased to give the sad and helpless look. When he's knocked down and they start cutting off his mane, he stares forward helplessly as he allows them to demean and torture him. You can see his expression go from a glare to a helpless look of longing. With anthropomorphizing lions specifically, it's all in the eyebrows. The 2D Lion King used the same method, albeit in a different and much more pronounced style. While they're cutting his mane off, he looks upwards and you can tell he's suffering and just wants the torture to be over. Then later, when he's resurrected, they make him look happy by giving him the ability to smile through raising the ends of his mouth. It's not something that a lion is physically capable of doing, but it adds so much expression to an otherwise real-looking animal. Most of his expression, however, as I said, is in the eyebrows. He widens widens and narrows his eyes accordingly. Coupled with the ability to move his mouth in ways that a real lion couldn't, it makes Aslan an incredibly well done CGI lion who is brimming with the emotion that he needs to portray for whatever scene he's in. While he very clearly isn't a real lion, it still did its job and looks better than the attempted photorealism at play here. The director on that movie knew that placing a real lion into their movie wouldn't work and give the same emotional punch that it needed to, so instead they opted for stylized realism, and it worked really, really well, even to this day, regardless of the fact that the movie was made back in 2005. If The Lion King 2019 was less restrictive in what attributes they did and didn't allow, we'd probably see just as much emotion come through in their scenes as well. And if we wanted to use a more recent example, Detective Pikachu is an excellent one. The reason a lot of people like this movie was because the director didn't attempt to go photorealistic with the Pokemon designs. There's still creative freedom in them that isn't bound to the rules of nature, and they still were able to emote in a way that is, in a word, human. If Pikachu had a photorealistic yellow rodent face, then I doubt the comedic or emotional moments would have worked as well as they did. Sure, the Pokemon don't really fool your eyes into thinking that they're real, but they don't have to because they still serve their purpose regardless. To drive the point home further, let's take a look at the original animated film, The Lion King 1994, and compare it to The Lion King 2019. Let's start with the scene that made me make this video, Hakuna Matata. Now, let's take a look at the animated version first. We're only going to look at the portions that have been shown to us from the live-action movie thus far. It starts off with Simba looking confident, his strides proud. He has a smile on his face and is harmoniously interacting with both Pumbaa and Timon. Instead of being in one area, the movie shows them in multiple areas within their private, lush, and colorful paradise. Timon, Pumbaa, and Simba jump off into a body of water, and even in the splashes we can see parts of their personality and visual comedy at play. For example, how Pumbaa makes a tiny splash in the water and Timon makes a bigger splash than Pumbaa. Then Simba comes in and creates a wave, pushing the trio to shore. Timon surfs to safety using Pumbaa's belly as a boat, showing off their character dynamic. Even Simba coming out of the water and shaking his fur dry shows his carefree personality and creates a visual gag for the audience to laugh at given his puffed out mane. The three then walk off with a bit of a bounce in their step which emulates dancing. Their moods and emotions are clear here, from the cool relaxing colors to the way that Simba, Timon, and Pumbaa carry themselves. Now, let's look at the live action version of this part of the movie. It starts with Simba jumping out into a very dull looking environment and into the camera view. If you were listening to this scene muted, which you are now, a happy lion isn't something that immediately would come to your mind. At least to me, it looked like Simba was jumping out and getting ready to attack or yell at somebody. The lack of facial expression certainly does not help the case here. To make up for this, like I was talking about earlier, Simba is made to jump around a lot for emphasis that he's happy. This gives the Uncanny Valley vibes because he looks like he's a real lion, but he isn't moving realistically. The way that Simba's mouth moves and the way his eyes look around doesn't fit with the lively and happy tone coming from his voice actor. It looks like a lion simply closing and opening its mouth over and over again, not like an animal who is talking or singing. The utilization of closing his eyes certainly helps his emotion expression, but it doesn't go very far when it's the only type of facial expression aid that he has. The other thing to notice about this scene is how they aren't really doing anything here but walking in a line. The water scene from the first movie is missing, I'm assuming because they couldn't get the animals to move how they wanted to for this scene to look realistic enough. I mean, a lion swinging from a vine isn't physically possible, so I understand why they would have wanted to cut it out, but this unfortunately leads to the scene looking bland and uninspired because all they're doing is walking in a straight line. It doesn't really sell to me that these three are close to each other or even that they're living in a paradise. You also lose a lot of the characterization of these characters since there's nothing unique to their movements. Timon isn't dancing or moving by himself, he's just hanging out on Pumbaa, and Pumbaa isn't moving uniquely either, he's simply trotting alongside Simba. Character movement and mannerisms, even in movies that aren't animated, is what helps set characters apart from others. You don't have anything that shows their personalities in this scene, and it really pales in comparison to what something stylized could have shown. For our second scene comparison, we're going to look at Mufasa's death. This scene is probably one of the most masterfully executed scenes in any of the Disney Renaissance movies, or just any animated Disney movie in general. The use of the shadows, Scar's expectant watching and pacing, the zooming on Simba's face as he looks frantically for his father amongst the rampaging wildebeest. There's just a perfect build-up and a perfect ending execution. Scar's anticipation, Mufasa's panic, Simba's horror, and then it comes down to the betrayal. Scar digs his claws into his brother's paws before slowly leaning down to whisper, "Long live the king. You can see in Mufasa's face as he understands what's happening, the absolute horror of realization. The use of the shadows here brings upon a feeling of dread, increasing as the king's eyes widen in horror. You can see the look of betrayal. You can see the pain, confusion, and fear. You can see Scar's sly and villainous expression, his sick and twisted joy, and that his plan had worked. He then throws Mufasa off the cliff face as he is left to writhe in agony, falling to the stampede below. We then transition out of Simba's eye as he watches his father falling, showing from the transition that's all he saw. He didn't see the betrayal, he only saw as his father plummeted to his death. This is one of the most emotional scenes of the movie, expertly pulled off with the transitions and cinematography. You can feel the helplessness and it's obvious in the visuals. Now let's switch over to how The Lion King 2019 handles this scene. It's bright out, and the shadows that made the first movie as haunting are absent here. Scar doesn't look sly in the delivery of his lines. He isn't even leaning in to whisper them to his brothers to be the last words he ever hears. Instead, he's just outright saying them as he looks down, making the scene have a far less malicious feel to it. Then instead of letting Mufasa go, he instead swipes at him to make him lose his grip off the side of the cliff. It looks more like an animal slipping on an episode of Animal Cops Houston than it does a betrayal. Mufasa turns away from Scar while he's falling instead of having the effect in the movie where he looks like he's just been thrown off. We're also lacking the zoom effect out of Simba's eye, and it instead just starts off at a pan a few inches away from his face. You cannot see the emotion in Simba's face. He just looks like a lion cub who is angry, not a lion cub who just watched the brutal murder of their father. Facial expressions are key in expression next to body movement, and even this scene has fallen victim to sacrificing its emotions in the name of complete photorealism. Even when the reviews for The Lion King came in, nearly all of the positive ones were praising the visuals and nothing else. And while yes, the visuals are important in a movie, it isn't everything. It also comes down to how those visuals are implemented as well as the visual style that was used. If anything, I think this movie proves that photorealism doesn't always mean better. While it is an impressive feat to replicate real life in such a way that fools the human eye, in some situations it just doesn't work and takes away from the overall quality of the final product. There's much more that can be said about the Disney Renaissance remakes, but I'll leave it at this. Some things are better off left in their cartoony and stylized states. Cartoons allow for expression that photorealism and real life limits, whether it be animals having facial expressions or the environments being colorful and full of life. Transitioning such things over to CGI animation in a photorealistic style just doesn't work well. Consider that the originals were made in a way that they were for a reason, and that reason, I think, will be all the more obvious on July 19th when this movie comes out. I hope that people will start to see that photorealism doesn't always mean better, and start to believe that live action isn't peak entertainment, as well as stop believing that cartoons are only for children. Stylized animation still has its place and can be just as entertaining, if not more so, depending on the situation. And if it takes a really lackluster Hakuna Matata scene with a realistic lion, warthog, and meerkat for people to understand that, then so be it. If you like this video, consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon to see more from me when I upload. Remember that I always have polls over on my YouTube community page after every upload, so be sure to head over there or to my Twitter to participate. Special thank you to my top tier patrons, Charlize Jefferson, Ryan D, and Zachary Ansley. It's because of people like them that I can continue to make content like this. And I will see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.